Make up mind. Fight.
Aiming is the fundamental principle of any first-person shooter game. Generally, a player who can point their gun at enemies and hit them will be more helpful to their team than a player who can't. In Team Fortress 2 specifically, aiming is given a bit of additional nuance through its various different types of damage, bullet spread, projectile speeds, and things like that. This is honestly one of my favorite things about the game. There's a lot of unique skill expression that comes of getting good at its different weapon types and aim mechanics. However, not every weapon is created equal in that regard in TF2. Some weapons are built by design to require a higher baseline of mechanical aiming talent to consistently land shots with. Be it for a tighter spread, a faster projectile, or some weird niche design, some TF2 weapons require just a bit more precision to get good with. And in this video, I want to talk about some of these. These are 5, yes 5, this one's gonna be big, precision weapons in TF2. Weapons that reward pinpoint aim with the ability to absolutely ravage your enemies. The only thing I want to note here is that we won't be discussing any sniper weapons, as I want this video to be the aim equivalent to my non-spy stealth weapons and non-medic healing weapons videos. Also, sniper is a stupid asshole poopy head. All that said, let's roll. So let's start this video out on a bit of familiar ground. I've been making these weapon subcategories TF2 videos for almost a year now, and if you're the kind of person who fancies themselves a connoisseur of mediocre videos about a 17-year-old game, then you might remember that the very first weapon I talked about in this series was Soldier's Direct Hit. This was all the way back in the skill-dependent weapons video, a video that I'm pretty sure most people remember for other reasons. But yeah, I talked about the direct hit in that installment and how its unique brand of high-risk, high-reward devastation really adds some extra skill expression and fun factor to Soldier's gameplay for those who could master it. It's most definitely a skill-dependent weapon, and it's entirely due to its higher required baseline of precision. Because of that, I think it's time we revisit the direct hit and see if my opinions about it still hold true to this day. Let's dive in. The direct hit is an unlockable achievement primary weapon for Soldier. A large cylindrical rocket launcher fitted with a scope, this weapon's primary trait is that it fires both very fast and deals a lot of damage. Boasting a whopping 80% faster projectile speed and a 25% damage bonus, this weapon fires rockets that are capable of just deleting people in a single flick of the mouse one button. It also deals guaranteed mini-crits to players popped up in the air by explosives, adding a bit of a built-in one-weapon combo potential to this item. As its sole negative, this weapon features a 70% smaller explosive radius, making its splash zone only about the size of an active teleporter. All of this combined makes the direct hit an incredibly rewarding rocket launcher for players who can land hits with it, yet one that requires a ton of in-the-moment precision to actually land those hits with. So right out of the gate, we have something very, very important to know about the direct hit. Thanks to its 25% damage bonus, this is one of very few weapons in the game that's capable of consistently and unconditionally one-shotting light classes from full health. It does not require a headshot, a backstab, a crit, or any sort of damage buff or bonus to do this. All you need to do is be relatively close to your target, and you'll quickly be watching yourself absolutely eviscerate enemies with a tremendous 140 max damage. This is an exceptionally rare trait in TF2, as most weapons capable of one-shotting require some sort of investment, positioning, or buff to do it. The direct hit, by comparison, is able to one-shot purely through its own damage numbers. And even if you're not one-shotting, it still has a base damage of around 110 and a maximum fall-off of around 60, which means it's dealing roughly the same amount of damage as a melee swing from maximum fall off. In terms of raw burst damage, nothing really tops the direct hit in TF2. And this is helped by its incredibly generous 80% faster projectile speed. This is enormous and allows the direct hit rocket to clear a map's worth of distance in a time frame that would give Usain Bolt a run for his money. At close range, it's borderline hit scan. This facilitates a well-aimed direct hit rocket to absolutely blindside close range enemies and hammer longer range ones with repeated strikes that are too quick for them to react to. You can 3-shot a heavy with this thing in a time span that could affectionately be described as silly, and do the same to light classes in a fraction of the time. It also fucks buildings raw and divine, especially mini-sentries, which can be one-shot from any range. Plus, there's this.
My head!
This very funny flex mini-crit combo is almost entirely for show, as most enemies probably wouldn't have survived a second direct hit rocket either way, but I cannot deny how satisfying it is to pop an enemy up and then ensure they never feel the ground again. The direct hit is all around the de facto big damage rocket launcher, a weapon so excessive in its killing potential that it could give the average Mortal Kombat fatal a run for their money. The amount of clips I got of me just making snipers and scouts disappear is too numerous to count. I was actually dreading recording this thing at first, but once I got in the groove, I just couldn't stop. I did have to learn to be careful around pyros though.
Yesterday I had a moment of weakness. And I want to apologize to all the people that are disappointed in me, and you're right to be.
So all of this sounds pretty cool, right? I bet you're getting ready to either buy or pull out a strange one right now and go on some crazy kill streaks. Unfortunately though, it won't be that easy, as despite its insane damage, the direct hit isn't a weapon entirely defined by its killing power. No, this is very much a weapon that's existence revolves around its one sole negative. A negative that makes it just about as inaccessible as it comes for a new or inexperienced player. A 70% smaller explosive radius. This stat is the direct hit, no argument about it, and is the thing that this weapon is infamous for. For every deleted scout or sleek air shot, the thing that people know the direct hit for is absolutely beefing all 4 rockets at close range and eating every flavor of shit on offer. It might not sound that bad, it's easy to say just land direct hits forehead, but in practice, this is an absolutely crushing downside that makes the direct hit more of a flex weapon than anything else. Really, imagine your typical soldier match with any other primary and think about how many direct hits you're actually landing on average. How many kills are you getting that you can confidently say were from perfectly landed rockets, and how many can you say were from well-timed splash damage hits and taking out groups of enemies with singular shots? It's not reasonable to expect to always land direct hits with a projectile this slow and linear. Soldier is helped tremendously by his splash damage, and the vast majority of his killing potential comes from bombing in on enemies with his rocket's generous explosive range. For all intents and purposes, that kind of stuff is impossible with the direct hit. It cannot scoop up a medic and his heal target in a single rocket, or sweep an engineer nest all at the same time in the same way as any other rocket launcher. It absolutely eviscerates weak single targets, but only weak single targets. And that's assuming you can even hit those targets, and that's not a guarantee, because this weapon pretty much demands perfection to consistently hit people. If you're not an absolute god direct hit soldier with a confidence bordering on delusional, then this weapon will absolutely break your back and humble you. Rip Sheik. Soldier is a class who's sometimes criticized for lacking precision or thought in fighting as him, just shoot enemies' feet and blind fire in their general direction, and if you're the kind of person who prescribes to that belief, then you'll probably really like the direct hit. It takes no prisoners and throws you to the wolves as soon as you equip it. There's a reason it's so common to see new player soldiers who find it through random drop or achievement get absolutely embarrassed using it. At the same time, there's also a reason you see some very experienced and sometimes dishonest soldier players use this thing to great effect. It's one of the least lenient yet most rewarding weapons in TF2 to get good with. It is not a weapon for beginners, yet one that can carry the day if you can measure up to its lofty standards. All in all, the direct hit is a prime example of a precision weapon in TF2, which is the reason I led with it here. It's defined by its ludicrously strong set of upsides that might make it a no-brainer to equip for some players, yet also having a single downside so severe and humbling that most others would probably never consider it. It has some of the objective best upsides that a TF2 weapon can offer, yet is counterbalanced by an appropriately huge single downside. On a class who's often on the receiving end of brainless or easy complaints, the direct hit positions itself as a high-risk, high-reward primary alternative that's sure to butter the biscuits of anyone who really fancies themselves a truly skilled player of this 17-year-old game with a niche at best competitive scene. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, it requires a lot of aim, so that's why it's in the video. For what it's worth, I still like and respect the direct hit.
There's no crying! There's no crying in baseball!
So, did you like how the direct hit section of this video was simple, how all of its stats were easy to describe, clearly articulated by the game, and transparent in their use cases? Well, our next 2 weapons will be exactly the opposite. For some reason, Valve decided to front load 2 of this game's dedicated precision weapons with some of the most vague and unintuitive stat lineups in the game. They require aim, patience, and nuance both to play well with and to understand at a base foundational level. Let's start out with the less egregious of the 2, Scout's Shortstop. This plucky little Derringer-style shotgun was added in 2010's Man Economy update and has always rested as the comfortable, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, number 3 or 4 of Scout primaries. For what it's worth, I actually really like the Shortstop, but I cannot deny that it's not exactly the most transparent weapon in the game to pick up and use. It changes a lot about Scout's game plan at a base and doesn't put forth a lot of legwork to articulate just how much it does that. Let's talk about it. The Shortstop is an unlockable primary weapon for Scout, a small quad-barrel Derringer-style shotgun. This gun's only listed stats are that it grants the Scout increased push force from incoming damage, loads 4 shots at a time and reloads its entire clip at once, and features a nifty right-click shove mechanic. However, there is a lot more to this thing than those listed stats would imply, as it's basically an entirely separate weapon category. For one, it has a faster firing speed and tighter spread than Scout's other scatterguns, does not feature Scout's typical damage ramp-up, meaning that it does less damage at close range range and more damage at long range, and fires only 4 pellets per shot compared to stock's 10, with a double damage bonus per pellet, which results in a net 20% lower damage overall compared to stock at point blank range. However, thanks to its faster firing speed and tighter spread, this weapon boasts frightening mid-range damage potential for Scout and allows him to excel beyond his ordinary close range engagements. Boy, that is an unintuitive weapon. You know how Valve sometimes doesn't explain weapons that belong to entirely separate categories at all in their descriptions, and just kind of rely on the player's intuition to understand what a gun does? You know, stuff like the Huntsman or Flare Gun? Yeah, the Shortstop is definitely one of those. Its hefty lineup of unlisted stats combined with its design leads quite a few players to not fully understand just what it is when they first get it, and I've even heard of some people who think it's a secondary upon first unlocking it. But make no mistake, this is a primary weapon. It's a shotgun that deals roughly 50 to 70 damage per shot at mid-range, and can absolutely carry the day in the right hands. Despite its compact size, you should not take this thing lightly. Before we talk about that though, we've got to talk about the shove. I'll be honest, in my initial 70+ clip recording session for this weapon, I completely forgot to record even a single instance of me using the shove. I know some people really stand by it as a funny meme tool, but to me, this is genuinely one of the most forgettable and dismissible mechanics in the entire game. By pressing right click, Scout will throw out a slightly delayed push that does 1 damage and knocks enemies back, displacing them and lining them up perfectly for a follow-up attack, not unlike Pyro's Air Blast. The 1 damage is primarily there to ensure the Scout gets kill credit if the enemy is pushed off a cliff and dies, but otherwise, this is a completely useless, incredibly puzzling inclusion to the weapon. The shove is delayed and has a very specific hitbox, so it's remarkably difficult to actually line up, and it contrasts pretty heavily with this weapon's base design. This is a weapon intended to be used at mid-range, so why would you ever be close enough to enemies to throw your hands into their faces like you're doing a peanut jig of your own? And while we're talking about the shove, let's quickly discuss its other listed stats. The push force increase is crazy because I've heard some people mention that they find this stat to be also dismissible and minor, but like, no? I might be stupid, but I really noticed it while recording with this item. You get knocked around like you're in a 40x showing of twisters using this thing, especially by rockets and sentries. This can actually come in handy for quickly escaping and avoiding follow-ups and combos though, so I wouldn't strictly call it a negative, just something to keep in mind while using this weapon. Okay, now that we've gotten all the stuff the game actually tells you about out of the way, we can talk about what the Shortstop is really for. This is not the funny push gun or the primary pistol replacement. This is certifiably Scout's designated medium-range shotgun. Compared to every other scatter gun, this thing pales at close range, only doing around 70 damage, yet its combination of hefty rapid-fire shots and pinpoint accuracy make it a clear winner at mid to long range. If you can line up your shots on enemies from mid-range while strafing around them, you can drop most enemies in the game with a speed and efficiency that'll probably leave them doggedly pulling up the TF2 wiki mid-match. This isn't free, however, as due to this weapon's effective range, extremely tight spread, lack of pellets, and firing speed, it's very easy to dump your entire clip into the air around your enemy and leaving them no worse for wear. And in that situation, you'll find the Shortstop's committal reload and small clip size really hurting. It does reload its entire clip at once, but the process is much slower than, say, the Soda Popper doing the same thing. Even with that though, this is still the de facto precision mid-range scattergun. Every other Scout primary features a dedicated cone of bullet spread after you press mouse 1, allowing even a slightly inaccurate shot to connect a few pellets and deal a bit of damage. By comparison, the Shortstop fires all of its pellets in a very strict, nearly straight line, meaning that your crosshair has to be firmly placed on a foe's hitbox when you shoot to connect and deal any real damage. I found this weapon's damage to be kind of inconsistent due to the way its pellets work, dealing anywhere from 2 to upwards of 50 damage at medium to long range, depending on how many individual bullets actually connect. Even then, the speed and range of its attacks make it a no-brainer for maps and game states where engaging an enemy at close range is more difficult, and allows Scout to be a real menace to enemies who may otherwise think they're in the clear against him. I cannot stress enough how fun and satisfying it is to pelt any given enemy with 4 rapid-fire shots in a row from across a control point and see them panic as their health disappears before their eyes. This gun allows Scout to pick and engage in fights that are otherwise out of his wheelhouse, and I think that's very cool. This goes double with the right secondary option, and I find the Shortstop to really flourish with pretty much every non-pistol or bonk sidearm that Scout has. The Mad Milk, its intended combo, allows you to stay in the fight very effectively so long as you can land your shots. The Cleaver can apply pressure and put enemies on borrowed time while you hammer them with mid-range meat shots, and the Criticola, this is the combo. Thanks to the Criticola's mini-crits mitigating damage fall off, you can absolutely decimate enemies from pretty much any any range using it alongside the Shortstop. A gun that already has potent mid-range damage and seamless accuracy becomes a lot scarier when you're dealing a guaranteed 90 to 100 damage from across the map with each shot. To me, the Criticola is the Shortstop secondary, but there's absolutely merit to the other options as well. All said and done, the Shortstop is a weapon defined by having two very distinct sides. The side Valve tells you about, the funny gimmick push-shove weapon, and the side that you figure out for yourself, the medium-range burst damage weapon. Again, I want to reiterate that this is probably one of the most unintuitive weapon designs in the game. It's crazy to think that if this weapon's stats were actually written out as they function, its tooltip would look more like this and less like this. For what it's worth, I really like the Shortstop, and often find myself having fun when I use it. Compared to stock or the soda popper, it's really different and fun without being overly gimmicky, like the Babyface's blaster or backscatter. It's far from a bad weapon, and is one that really rewards mechanical aiming skill in a way that's entirely unique for scout primaries. I genuinely feel like this thing would have a much more positive reputation if Valve actually bothered to write out stats for it. I sure am glad this is going to be the only weapon in the video like this, though. Right? Dragon Ball Z. Okay, let's get this one out of the way. So the Dragon's Fury is an unlockable weapon for Pyro added in the coveted Jungle Inferno update. It's a really cool weapon conceptually, being a huge burst damage single shot flamethrower that gets stronger and faster the more fireballs you're able to land with it, yet also being incredibly strict and uncompromising in its downsides if you can't connect any consistently. It's also very, very unintuitive and archaic in terms of its stats and function, and I distinctly remember a lot of people not knowing how to feel about it when it was first added to the game. Nowadays, it's pretty popular as a high-skill, high-reward primary alternative for Pyro, but you wouldn't know that based on its average casual user. It was the most glaring omission from my skill-dependent weapons video, and fun fact, I actually did intend to talk about it there, but opted not to because I had no idea how to begin discussing it. But it definitely is Pyro's most precision-heavy flamethrower, so it'd be a disservice to ignore it here. Let's rock the dragon and discuss the Dragon's Fury. People sometimes tend to accuse me of just reading off the TF2 wiki in these videos, and truth be told, that's something I actually try to avoid doing wherever possible, but in this case, we're gonna read the wiki page for this item verbatim, as I feel it'll do a better job of articulating its mechanics than I ever could. Please forgive me for my lazy TF2ing, this won't happen again. The Dragon's Fury is an unlockable primary weapon for Pyro. Acting as a single-shot, projectile-based flamethrower, the Dragon's Fury carries 40 rounds instead of the 200 fuel held by Pyro's other primary weapons. Primary fire uses 1 round and launches a quick, short-range fireball projectile that travels at 3,000 hammer units per second. Each fireball inflicts around the same damage as a flare gun shot, causing enemies to suffer afterburn for a short time, even enemy Pyros, albeit for a shorter time than other classes. Hitting an enemy that is already on fire deals 3 times the damage so long as the center of the fireball connects with the target. A successful hit on an enemy or building decreases the reload time of the following shot by 34%. The 300% extra damage bonus to burning players is actually this weapon's base damage rather than an increase in damage, meaning that it effectively has a 66% damage penalty against non-burning players. This also means that damage from fireballs hitting a burning player stacks with the additional damage if affected by crits or mini-crits. Alt-Fire uses 5 rounds to perform a standard compression blast, but it requires twice the normal reload time.
What the fuck?
So yeah, I would definitely describe the Dragon's Fury as just a little bit cryptic in terms of its function. It's fucked up too, because when you actually use it in game, it's remarkably easy to get to grips with. It's a fireball cannon that does more damage and shoots faster against people who are already on fire. Big whoop, wanna fight about it? Yet, for some reason, describing this thing's mechanics in detail to someone sounds like the ramblings of a madman. Its in-game tooltip is structured like a stat sandwich, its TF2 wiki page is written like a manifesto, and it's all around not an easy weapon to grasp the bare essentials of. I remember nobody really knowing how to parse this thing when it was first revealed in Jungle Inferno, and the community spending the next few months after it was actually released trying to figure out if it was any good or not. If they wanted to make a more complicated and skill-intensive Pyro primary, then mission accomplished, but just fuck. This is further compounded by this weapon's main defining trait in-game. Compared to every other Pyro flamethrower, the Dragon's Fury is easily the one that mandates the most mechanical execution. Compared to literally every other flamethrower, which fire out a stream of flame particles that can easily melt an entire team with enough sustained focus fire, the Dragon's Fury requires significantly more aim, patience, and, would you guess it, Precision. It fires singular fireballs in a straight line ahead of you, and while the particle itself appears to be pretty huge to a point where it basically flashbangs you, the actual hitbox and effective area to damage enemies is much, much smaller. This thing has a super tight window to actually connect, which combined with its convoluted in-game description and deceptively large projectile particle, makes it just about as beginner unfriendly as a TF2 weapon can possibly be. But, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for a weapon that was added right after the game's 10th anniversary. Not every weapon needs to be easy or approachable to new players. That's kind of the point of this video. When you get to grips with the Dragon's Fury and have done all of the necessary college courses to understand how it works, I found it to be one of the most consistently fun and rewarding flamethrowers in the game. This is a weapon where what you get out of it is what you put into it. If you want to get good with it and put forth the necessary practice to understand it, then it's an absolute monster. Yet if you equip it expecting a free W plus M1 sweep like any other flamethrower, then you will quickly find yourself being burned down to size. This is the aiming man's Pyro primary, a weapon that poses a significant adaptation check to new users, yet rewards their adaptation to it in spades. The most immediately notable thing about the Dragon's Fury is its damage potential. If you're able to connect multiple shots in a row on either a single target or group of targets, then you'll quickly find them dropping like bats to the Fury's flamethrower. This thing does damage in bursts of roughly 85 or more in incredibly quick succession so long as you can connect them, and thanks to being a Pyro primary, it can still damage multiple enemies at a time. A big thing to consider with this weapon is that you're effectively still using a flamethrower here, just one that shoots fire in a different form factor than the other options. It shoots fireballs rather than a stream of flames, meaning that it can still ignite multiple people at once and can still pass through enemies and buildings, allowing it to still inflict afterburn. In fact, the Dragon's Fury is unique among flamethrowers in that it has a tangible lasting effect on enemy pyros without the gas passer, meaning that you can follow up on your shots against them like you could any other class. They don't take afterburn damage per se, but the flame effect still lingers long enough to enable repeat attacks. On top of that, the Dragon's Fury has a few additional bells and whistles that really make it fun to experiment with. It deals a flat 75 damage to buildings and gains its fire speed buff while shooting them, making it phenomenal at shredding engineer nests. It also has a startlingly long range, allowing it to hit multiple enemies from much farther away than it feels like it probably should. Lastly, as was mentioned by the TF2 wiki, its triple damage against burning players is actually its unmodified base damage, meaning that with crits or another flat damage boost, this thing pretty much... yeah, all of these stats combined make the Dragon's Fury a monster of a damage dealer, and with the backing support of your team, or especially an Uber, it can be a real terror to the enemy team. All that said, this weapon definitely does have a few pretty significant downsides outside of its somewhat high skill floor. For one, as a weapon released in the infamously slapdash Jungle Inferno update, it's as buggy as the underside of a damp rock, and some of these bugs are more significant than others. One notable one is that certain map geometry just straight up eats its projectile, which isn't a huge deal when it happens to, say, the Righteous Bison or Rap Assassin, but on the primary attack of an unlockable primary weapon, it's definitely a bit less excusable. Additionally, the whole repressurization mechanic on Air Blast is pretty harsh, and makes what should be easy extinguishes and reflects on teammates and enemies more of a commitment than they would be otherwise. And as a final, somewhat less severe negative, I find that sometimes at the Dragon's Fury, the juice really isn't worth the squeeze. Like, it's very fun and feels very good to use well, but I sometimes find myself wondering if the intense required focus and aim is really worth it, considering that Pyro has other options that can just effectively kill enemies with much less investment. Should I really spend hours labbing the Dragon's Fury, or just use any of Pyro's many other old reliables? I think this argument depends heavily on the individual player and their preferences. Some people will naturally gravitate more towards the higher skill expression afforded by the Dragon's Fury, or the lower skill floor of the flamethrower, and that's fine. It's just something to keep in mind. But even with that said, the Dragon's Fury is still a pretty damn cool weapon. I whinged and complained a lot about it being unintuitive and archaic, but that's really only when you're first learning it and trying to figure out where its hitbox is. When you're more experienced with it, I find the Dragon's Fury to be a fun and welcome addition to TF2 that adds a ton of very well appreciated skill expression to the average Pyro match. It's not my immediate first choice on Pyro, but Pyro isn't my immediate first choice in TF2, so it evens out. Both are options that I get the itch to use every now and again, and I can totally understand why some people view this thing as the weapon that makes Pyro. There really is nothing else like it in the game. Now, if only it didn't flashbang me every time I used it, and we'd really be talking.
What's going on, Tommy? I'm not Tommy.
Ah, we're on my home turf. This will probably be a relatively shorter section for the weapon subcategory series, as I've already discussed the Tomislav in detail on this channel before in my ranking every heavy minigun for casual video. In that video, I put it in S tier behind only the stock minigun, mostly due to personal preference, and acknowledged that it ultimately was probably an objectively better gun. The Tomislav is one of those TF2 unlocks that really makes the class it's on. This is a lot of people's de facto favorite minigun, and a weapon that I know plenty of people couldn't imagine picking heavy without. Also, its name has like 6 references built right in, and that's cool. Let's talk about the Tomislav. The Tomislav is an unlockable primary weapon for heavy. A large, heavily modified Thompson submachine gun fitted to function as a minigun, this weapon boasts a primary ability to rev very fast and quietly compared to the stock minigun. It features a 20% faster spin-up time, in addition to 20% more accurate shots, making its spread much tighter than any other minigun, while also increasing the speed with which you can start firing it. Additionally, its rev is completely silent, enabling a heavy to hide with it around corners or out of view to surprise enemies while remaining rev. Its only negative for these bountiful upsides is a 20% slower firing speed, which results in it having a slightly lower DPS than the stock minigun. At the end of the day though, it's still a goddamn minigun, and deals around 400 damage per second either way. If I had to use one word to describe the Tomislav and the experience of using it, it'd be flexible. Heavy is often criticized for being a very linear class that's strong-armed into an immobile defensive tank role due to his minigun's rev mechanics and the danger associated with revving in the wrong position. I personally couldn't disagree more with this, cite these videos for more information, but it's still a common stigma associated with heavy either way. The Tomislav poises to remove that stigma, offering heavy a much more lenient and much less rigid battle plan in exchange for a higher required baseline of tracking and aim. If you can adjust to aiming with the Tomislav, you're not giving up much compared to stock. It's very fundamental and very strong. Truth be told, the Tomislav is pretty much devoid of downsides in the conventional sense. While it is true that some kills may escape you due to the lower DPS, and a Tomislav heavy does objectively lose to a minigun heavy if they both start shooting at the same time from full health, it's otherwise a strictly beneficial weapon that only serves to liven up Heavy's game plan and make him much more flexible on the battlefield. Being able to start shooting sooner after pressing M2 means less time stuck in an animation without doing damage, and less time that the enemy has to safely fire on you. Even a reduction as low as 20% means a lot in the throes of the average TF2 match. Heavy has a ton to gain from being able to rev and fire faster. He's able to play more aggressively, rev up more reactively, and be much more picky-choosy in battling his enemies. And that's not the only bonus afforded to you by the Tomislav. This weapon's tighter spread is one of the most loaded stats in the game in terms of what it does for heavy, both positively and negatively. Starting with the negative, it does mean that this weapon requires much tighter tracking and has a significantly smaller cone of influence in front of the heavy, which can lead to easier juking from enemies and fewer lag compensation around corner kills. This is mostly mitigated with practice and experience though, as once you get good at tracking with the Tomislav, you're pretty much set for all of Heavy's miniguns. It's theoretically a higher baseline of required skill, but not by too much. This is a precision weapon, but not to the same degree as the direct hit or the Dragon's Fury. When we get to the positives of this stat though, is when things really get crazy. The Tomislav's tighter spread basically means that it has infinite range. Okay, maybe not infinite, it does have damage fall off, but for all intents and purposes, if a heavy with the Tomislav can see you, then he's a threat to you. This thing basically shoots in a straight line, so even if he's not killing you, he can pester you from far away for as long as he needs. Combine this with crits of any kind, be they mini, random, boosted, or anything else, and you've basically got a stream of no fall off instant death lasers flying from across the map. This stat goes a long way in articulating this weapon's role as Heavy's de facto enforcer minigun. Anyone he needs dead that he can see is a potential target. At either close range or long range, a Tomislav heavy is a force to be reckoned with. And what's extra fun too is that this weapon even comes with a toy to play with. By that, I mean it even comes with a silly bonus stat that's fun to mess around with. The silent rev on this thing is so damn BM in such a goofy way. Being able to perch up behind the enemy team's intended path and shoot people as they walk by is so disrespectful, and works so consistently and casual that I'm surprised people don't talk about it more. Heavy isn't exactly known for being stealthy, but he can absolutely be so with the Tomislav's silent rev. If you're ever behind enemy lines, being chased around a corner or some other third thing, enemies won't know you're revved until they're face to face with you. Fitting of a silence mechanic, this is a real sleeper stat and one that I think has a ton of untapped funny potential. All of that said, I think the coolest thing about the Tomislav is actually just how fundamental it is. Unlike every other unlockable minigun, this thing doesn't feature any sort of crazy gimmick or stat that significantly changes Heavy as a class or how he's played. If anything, it does nothing but bolster and enhance Heavy's already existing abilities, rather than significantly changing them or asking for any significant accommodation from the player. Considering that every other Heavy unlockable minigun has some gimmick or hook, the Natasha's slowdown, the Holong's fire, the Brass Beast vitamin deficiency, the Tomislav effectively just being a more flexible minigun is a really valuable trait. All said and done, the Tomislav is probably Heavy's best minigun. I still personally prefer the stock minigun, but I cannot deny the utility, strength, and most of all speed afforded by the Tomislav. This is right up there with the crossbow in terms of augmenting one class's base ability so much that it might as well be an unlockable stock weapon. The only reason I didn't talk about it in my stock replacements video is because I wanted to save it for this video. Also because I still like stock more, sorry. But either way, the Tomislav rocks. Please stop leaving angry comments under my minigun rankings.
Yes! Lock-N-Load! Lock-N-Load! Bring on the pain!
And to close out this video on just the most anticlimactic note possible, let's discuss Demo Man's Lock-N-Load. This weapon has had one of the most tumultuous update histories out of any gun in the game. Starting out is basically Demo Man's equivalent to the direct hit, complete with being capable of one-shotting light classes, to eventually becoming the biggest middle finger to engineers this side of the red tape recorder. I don't think the Lock-N-Load is on too many people's minds too often, unless they're coming out of the woodwork to call its faster projectile speed a crutch. And listen, buddy, I'm 25 with a job and bills. I have a lot of things to worry about before deciding on which TF2 weapons are crutches or not. Like, talking about TF2 weapons, let's discuss the Lock-N-Load. The Lock-N-Load is an unlockable primary weapon for Demo Man, a double-barrel grenade launcher loosely resembling an M79. This gun boasts the following stats. Its grenades travel 25% faster and do not tumble in the air, granting them both a cleaner arc and significantly further range, and they deal 25% extra damage to buildings. As a few trade-offs, this gun's grenades have a 25% smaller explosive radius, shatter harmlessly on contact with any non-player or building surface, which completely removes rollers from your toolkit, and the gun only loads 3 shots per clip as opposed to the other launcher's 4, despite only having 2 barrels. I guess one of them is double stuffed. So, fun fact, this weapon is commonly considered to be the fuck you engineer's gun. It deals extra damage to buildings after all, which would naturally lead to that conclusion. But what if I told you that it barely fucking means anything? A Lock-N-Load pill against a building does 125 damage, and every building in the game except Mini-Sentry start out at 150 HP before capping out at 216 at level 3. Considering that a stock grenade does 100 damage, this means that the only ordinary damage threshold the Lock-N-Load is crossing that the stock and Iron Bomber do not is 2-shotting a level 3 building. This is definitely helpful against like sentries, but otherwise every other building you're going to be fighting with this thing takes exactly the same number of pills as stock. It gets a little more complicated when you involve things like the Wrangler and repairs, but in general the Lock-N-Load's increased damage against buildings is only partially helpful and not a true weapon defining stat. No, I find the real important stat on the Lock-N-Load to be its 20% faster projectile speed and especially its lack of projectile tumble. I've mentioned this in a few videos in the past, but in case you're not aware, TF2 actually features built-in air drag and resistance for its projectiles, meaning that anything that tumbles through the air moves noticeably slower and less far than anything that travels in a clean arc. This is the reason the loose cannon's cannonballs are so slow and clunky, despite the listed faster projectile speed. Due to this, the Lock-N-Load's projectiles, which travel faster and do not tumble, experience a significantly cleaner arc and fly much farther than stock. This is a legitimate hidden upside. You can kill people from really far away with this thing. I don't know why TF2 has air drag to begin with. Like, this video game world the characters live in doesn't exactly need oxygen that the characters have to breathe, but it's still a thing that definitely matters for Demo Man either way. When you combine these stats, you end up with a weapon that can both hammer enemies with repeated pills extremely quickly, and also pull off some really sleek air shots with more consistency than Demo Man's other grenade launchers. Or you can just miss all of your shots, like I do in a lot of these clips, or this Demo Man does against my stationary sentry. Great work. You can also strike stationary targets from really far away and unexpected locations, which is always a sight to behold when it happens. This is the reason this weapon is considered a crutch to some people. Its pills travel faster, which I guess to some people makes them less skill intensive to land, which I guess is an argument to some people, but TF2 community, can I talk to you for a second? This weapon doesn't have rollers. Yeah, the Loch-N-Load completely lacks roller grenades. If a pipe does not hit a player or building, it harmlessly shatters into white projectiles. This does mean that anytime you hear the hit sound of the Loch-N-Load, you can rest comfortably knowing that you did in fact direct hit something, but it also means that this weapon requires easily the most precision and in-the-moment aim out of all of Demo Man's launchers. You have to hit something to deal damage with this thing, and considering its smaller explosive radius, you've got to be pretty damn accurate in doing that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't rollers also considered brain dead, luck-based, or lacking in skill? Don't people usually get mad when you kill them with those things? So which is it, TF2 community? Is the gun with faster projectiles but no rollers brain dead? Or is it the gun that has them? Which is it, huh? I'm obviously exaggerating for the bit here, but it does strike me as a little strange that the demo unlock, which objectively has the most strict condition to deal damage, is the one that's been saddled with the brain dead or crutch argument. By that logic, the direct hit is a crutch too. It also has a faster projectile speed and a smaller explosive radius. I think the Loch-N-Load is just an unfortunate victim of a long-standing community stigma, which resulted from its older version where it could one-shot that nobody wanted to question the norm enough to challenge. There's a lot of stuff like this in the TF2 community already. People refuse to stop parroting the same opinions from 10-year-old videos. We can leave the Loch-N-Load alone. And what's crazy is that I don't even think this weapon is that good. It's probably better than the loose cannon, but it's nowhere near as fun or charming, and its overall committal and clunky nature contrasted against its lack of significant upsides makes it a clear loser among Demo Man's primaries. When you've got the best damage dealer in the game who's capable of setting pseudo traps while also dealing the same amount of damage with two other very similar yet more flexible guns, a weapon like the Loch-N-Load kind of falls off very quickly. Not terrible, but probably my least favorite weapon from this video. At least it gave me a reason to use the Coach McGirt clip.
What if I kill you? What if I kill the soldier, hypothetically? Ow! Oh, that's on the... What the fuck?
They're all huntsman snipers.
And there we have it, a look at TF2's precision weapons. One thing I noticed while working on this video is that all of these weapons are either passable to straight up good, with their main downsides being their high execution and skill requirements. Even the Shortstop and Loch-N-Load, which are generally considered less good than the other things on this list, have clear-cut use cases and niches that they fill excellently, and are all around perfectly effective weapons in their own right. I think this is really cool that TF2 can have some objectively non-new player-friendly weapons that do cater to long-time highly skilled players that are just as fun to learn and get good with as the base level options on each class. All in all, a cool set of weapons that I was very eager and happy to talk about. Thanks, hope you all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!